You're looking at a new freight car from MTH, and on the surface it may look ordinary, but if you take a close look, you'll notice that this car has scale couplers. And that's what we're going to go over today, how to install KD scale couplers on an MTH freight car. This is the freight car that we're going to use for today's project. This is a new Premier Line TTX bulkhead flat car made by MTH. And you'll notice that it has the typical O-gauge size couplers attached to the trucks. There's nothing wrong with these couplers. They're very sturdy and rugged, and they work great. The only problem is that while this car is built to scale, these couplers are not. They're much larger than the prototype, and they're also connected directly to the truck instead of being connected to the car body as they are in the prototype. Now, if you're like me and you enjoy having a prototypical railroad, at least as prototypical as possible for a 3-rail layout, you may want to replace these big O-gauge couplers with scale couplers. Now, this is an O-scale coupler that's made by a company called KD, and what we're going to do today is remove this big O-gauge coupler and replace it with a scale coupler. Over the past several years, MTH has been working steadily to equip all of their Premier Line freight cars with KD-compatible mounting pads on the underside of each end of the car. And at this point, the majority of their Premier Line freight cars have these mounting pads on them, but not all of them do. Some of the toolings for the Premier Line freight cars are still older toolings that they haven't gotten around to converting yet, but by and large, most of them now have these mounting pads on them. Now, what are the mounting pads? Well, I don't know if you can see it too well right now. You will be able to see it when I take this truck off later, but there's 2 screw holes right here on the underside of the car that are protruding out, and those allow you to mount a scale coupler to the bottom of the car and thereby have scale coupler operation on any car you want. And like I said, most of the Premier Line freight cars from MTH now have these mounting pads on them. I wanted to stress that this project only applies to MTH Premier Line freight cars that are equipped with these KD-compatible mounting pads. This project does not apply to MTH's Rail King line of products. It doesn't apply to Lionel products, or Atlas, or Weaver, or Williams products. The last thing I wanted to tell you is that I don't want you to feel obligated to do this. This is something that's purely a matter of choice. Functionally speaking, these O-gauge couplers work just as well as the scale couplers do, so there's no functional reason to switch these couplers out. But if you're like me and you want to go an extra step in making your railroad look a little more prototypical, then adding scale couplers to your car is something that's fun to do, and it's a good way to spend a rainy day. So let's get started. These are the supplies we're going to need for today's project, and as you can see, it's quite a bit of stuff, but don't worry too much because most of this stuff should already be in your arsenal. Now, the first thing we're going to need today is the main ingredient in our project, and that is a set of these O-scale magmatic couplers from KD. The part number is 806, and these are different from the regular O-scale couplers that KD sells because they have short draft gearboxes, and that's necessary because the regular draft gearboxes won't fit under an MTH car. So when you're doing an MTH car, you need the short draft gearboxes, which is part number 806. There's 2 couplers per package, and it's about $4 a pack, so not very expensive. The next thing we need, also from KD, is part number 1688, and that's a package of these 1-72 round head screws. They're 3/8 of an inch in length. There's a dozen screws per package, so that's enough to do 3 cars, and it's about $3 a pack, so again, not very expensive. And again, the part number is 1688. The next item you're going to need, also available from KD, is a tube of this greasome powdered graphite lubricant. The item number is number 231, and KD recommends that you use this to lubricate the moving parts of the coupler. The last KD item we're going to need is item number 812, and it is an O-scale coupler height gauge. And what this does is you set it on the track, and once you've installed your coupler on your car, you run the coupler up against this test coupler, and it lets you know if you've got your coupler set at the proper height. That way all of your cars will have a uniform height to the couplers. This costs about $16, and once you buy it, you can use it forever. And it's also got a number of tools on it. It's got the coupler height gauge, of course. It's got a body height gauge over here. It's got a wheel gauge here and here. The wheel gauge here is for O. The wheel gauge here is for ON30. And also, you can reconfigure this gauge so it'll be a coupler height gauge for ON30 rolling stock. So if you like ON30 trains like I do, you can reconfigure this and use it as a coupler height gauge for your ON30 rolling stock. The next thing you're going to need is a few pieces of styrene plastic. This is 0.06 inches in thickness. That's 0.06 of an inch thick. It comes in big sheets like you see here, and this is manufactured by Plastruct, and it comes 3 sheets to a pack for about $5 or $6. I've cut that sheet into some smaller pieces like this, and this is more than enough for today's uses. So as you can see, you can get quite a bit of work out of one of those packs of the styrene sheets. And again, it's about $5 or $6, not very expensive, and the thickness that you want is 0.06. I'll explain why later. We're going to use these to make shims for our couplers so that the couplers are at the proper height for this height gauge test. And again, I'll explain more about this later. You're going to want a good pair of scissors. I use the scissors to do my rough cuts of the styrene sheets to make my shims. Over here, we've got some black paint. This is Scale Coat 2 Loco Black, but any good black model paint will do. This is just going to be used to paint this white styrene so that it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb when it's attached to the coupler later. I've got a small disposable brush here for the paint. Right here I've got some cyanoacrylate glue, and that is basically super glue. Right here I've got a little cup. This is going to be used to store our screws that we're going to take off the car, as well as the springs from the trucks, because you'll find out later that we're going to have to reconfigure the MTH trucks, and we'll have to take the springs off of the truck, and you really don't want to lose those, so we're going to keep all of our small parts in this little cup. Right here I've got some assorted files. I've got a larger file for filing down these styrene sheets, which I'll show you how to do later. And then I've got some smaller files for deburring some of the edges on the coupler parts. I've got an X-Acto knife. This is a pin vise, and in the pin vise I've chucked up a 5/64 inch drill bit. If you're not familiar with a pin vise, it's just basically a hand drill. It allows you to drill something by hand, and you can chuck up a drill bit in the pin vise. You can get a pin vise for $5 or $6 at a hobby store, and again, the drill bit that I've chucked up in this is a 5/64 inch bit. You're going to need a small Phillips head screwdriver. You're also going to need a small flathead screwdriver. You're going to need a good pair of tweezers, like this. So that's it as far as supplies go. So now let's get started and let's install these scale KD couplers on our MTH car.